On a cold autumn evening, when the wind carried the scent of dry leaves and loneliness seemed to echo louder than footsteps, a young woman named Clara stumbled into a quiet village on the edge of Apache land, her shoes worn thin, her clothes patched from too many mended tears, and her eyes hollow with hunger yet burning with a stubborn fire of survival, and she stood before a wooden gate where a vast barn loomed like a silent guardian, its roof stretching wide as if it had been built to protect not only animals but weary souls too, and with trembling hands pressed against her heart, she whispered with a courage that was born from desperation, "Can I clean your barn for one night's sleep?" Her voice trembling as if the very air might deny her the dignity of being heard, but instead of the farmhand she expected or the farmer's wife with folded arms of suspicion, the heavy door creaked open and out stepped a giant Apache, towering in height, his shoulders broad enough to shadow the moonlight, his hair long and streaked with wisdom, his eyes fierce yet softened by the strange stillness of a man who had known both battle and silence, and when his gaze fell upon her fragile figure, wrapped in rags and dust, he froze. Not because she was a threat, nor because her plea was unusual, but because something in her eyes, the quiet dignity of a soul that refused to surrender even when broken, pierced through his warrior's heart like an arrow of memory, reminding him of his younger sister who had once begged for shelter during a winter raid and never survived the night, and in that instant, the barn was no longer just a barn but a chance for redemption, a place where an old wound might be healed by the simple act of saying yes. Yet instead of answering immediately, he studied her trembling hands clutching the strap of her worn satchel, as if every scrap of her life hung inside it, and he finally rumbled in a voice deep as the earth, "You would work for what should be freely given? You would trade your strength for rest?" And Clara lowered her head, ashamed, whispering, "I have nothing else to offer but my hands, and I do not beg for free gifts," and her words, simple yet fierce with pride, struck him like thunder, for he had lived in a world where too many took what they had not earned, yet here was someone with nothing, who still clung to honor like a shield, and so he stepped aside, motioning her in, and said, "Then come, you may clean my barn, and after that, you shall rest," and Clara, though weary, felt a warmth spark in her chest, for though the barn smelled of hay and years of toil, it was more welcoming than any palace could have been in that moment. She worked that night with hands blistered yet steady, sweeping away dust, stacking bales, humming softly to herself songs her mother once sang before illness stole her voice forever, and the giant Apache, whose name was Dakota, sat nearby sharpening his old blade, watching silently, not because he doubted her work but because he saw in her persistence the reflection of a people who had endured storms yet still rose with the dawn, and as hours passed, he found himself asking questions he had not spoken aloud in years. "Where do you come from, little one? What brought you to my gate?" And Clara, hesitant at first, answered between sweeps that she had been wandering since her parents died, that towns had turned her away for being poor, that hunger had been her companion longer than any friend, yet she had never stolen, never cursed her fate, only sought places where her hands might be useful enough to earn a bed, and with each word Dakota's silence grew heavier, for he remembered when his people too had been turned away, their lands taken, their dignity questioned, yet they endured, and he wondered if perhaps fate had brought her here not by chance but by purpose. By dawn, when her body ached and sweat clung to her brow, the barn gleamed in order, every tool polished, every corner swept, and Clara collapsed onto a pile of hay, exhausted yet smiling faintly for the first time in days, but before she drifted into sleep, she whispered, "Thank you, sir, for letting me earn a night's peace," and Dakota, who had long believed his heart too scarred to feel tenderness again, felt a lump rise in his throat, and he pulled a blanket from his own bed inside his cabin, laying it gently over her shoulders, whispering words in Apache tongue that meant, "Rest, little warrior, you are safe here." Though she did not understand the language, her soul seemed to hear it, for her breathing slowed into peace. The days that followed were not what either expected, for Clara, true to her word, rose each morning to work, not just in the barn but in the garden, in the kitchen, mending clothes, carrying water. Though Dakota never demanded it, she gave freely of her strength, and in return, Dakota found himself teaching her things he had once sworn never to share again after his sister's death. How to grind herbs for healing, how to listen to the wind for coming storms, how to sit in silence and let the earth speak, and though they were of different worlds, the bond between them grew, stitched together by kindness that needed no translation. Yet the village beyond was not blind, and whispers began to stir. Why does the giant Apache shelter the ragged girl? What does she bring but burden? And one evening, men from the town came, their boots loud against the soil, their eyes sharp with suspicion, and they demanded Clara be sent away, for they believed she was a thief, a beggar, a mouth that would drain resources not her own, and Clara, trembling before their accusations, lowered her head, prepared to leave rather than cause Dakota trouble, but before she could speak, the Apache giant stepped forward, his voice thunder yet calm, saying, "You see rags where I see honor, you see? weakness where I see strength, for this girl has given more in her work than many of you in your wealth, and if you drive her away, then you drive away the proof that goodness still breathes in this land." And his words, heavy with truth, silenced them, though their eyes still burned with prejudice. Yet Clara looked at him with tears shining like dawn on water, for in that moment, she realized he had not only given her shelter but had claimed her worth before those who doubted it. As weeks turned to months, Clara's cheeks filled with color, her laughter, once buried, returned, and Dakota, who had lived years in solitude, found his heart softened, not with romantic desire but with the protective love of a father, a brother, a guardian who had been given a second chance to keep alive what once he had lost. And in the quiet of winter, when snow blanketed the barn she had first cleaned, Clara sat by the fire and whispered, "You froze the night you saw me." "Why?" And Dakota, staring into the flames, finally told her of his sister, of the night she had begged for shelter and been denied, of how he carried the guilt of not saving her. And Clara, her hand small against his massive scarred one, said softly, "Then perhaps I was sent to remind you that sometimes saying yes can heal the past." And Dakota, eyes wet with the rare tears of a warrior, nodded, for he knew her words were true, and that his frozen moment had not been fear, but recognition of destiny. When spring came, the fields blossomed, and with them, so did Clara's future, for the townspeople, once suspicious, began to see the barn shining, the gardens thriving, the old Apache smiling again, and they realized it was the girl's hands that had helped rebuild what they had overlooked. And one by one, their hearts shifted, until one evening the same men who had once accused her now came to offer bread, clothing, and finally a place in the village. And Clara, though tempted, chose instead to stay beside Dakota, saying, "The world has given me many roofs, but this place gave me a home." And in that choice, both understood that family is not always of blood but of kindness, and that sometimes, the most broken wanderers carry the light that restores a house of shadows. Thus the barn that began as a place of desperation became a sanctuary of healing, and the giant Apache who once froze at the sight of a ragged girl found his heart thawed by the warmth of her courage, and together they proved that one night's kindness can ripple into lifetimes of change. And though they were only two souls in a wide and weary world, their story echoed a truth as old as the stars. That compassion, once given, multiplies, and that in offering shelter to another, we often find shelter for our own wounded hearts. And so the tale of Clara and Dakota became a quiet legend, whispered in the village fires for years to come, not of power or conquest, but of the simple yet world-changing strength of saying, "Yes, you may stay, for you are worthy of kindness." And it is said that those who pass the old barn can still feel the warmth of that night when a weary girl asked only to clean in exchange for sleep, but found instead the family she had lost, and the giant Apache found the sister he thought he could never save again.